Hi, this is M.Mosher. Case analysis presentation for POL 510-7101 Public Management with Professor Michael Goodman. This case study, Paul Levy, taking charge of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, details his first 6 months starting in the beginning of 2002 as president and CEO of the hospital. The case study begins with an introductory video in which Levy discusses the merger of the Beth Israel Hospital with the Deaconess Hospital and then the ensuing financial struggles. Levy faced many challenges when he took over at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I'm going to discuss what I think those major challenges were, and then I will discuss what steps I think he took to improve the hospital and make sure that his plan worked. So what were the organizational and structural leadership issues? As we know from the course this spring, proper structure and leadership is largely responsible for the success of public or nonprofit organizations. When he took over at the hospital, there were some glaring issues. Some of them were size and structure of the boards and committees, understanding and appropriate performance of the job duties, goal setting, and decision making. I'm going to go through each one of those, and then in the next section I'll go through what steps he took to improve the situation at the hospital. I'll then talk about some lessons and insights that public managers may be able to take from the case study and Levy's management style and so forth. And then I'll conclude with some thoughts about why I think he was successful. So the first issue that I saw is the size and structure of the boards and committees. Levy noticed right away and wanted to change the size of the board and committees, the board of directors at the hospital. He thought the board was too big to function properly, and actually asked the board before he was hired to downsize if he was hired. He felt the size of the board caused the majority of the members to not participate actively. Therefore, nothing really was ever accomplished. More specifically, at one point, during the case study, Levy had to remind two of his board members really what their role was and what the role of board members in general were. And then, in terms of committees, steering committees that Levy had put together, the chiefs were displeased, basically that they were not, for the most part, on those committees. Understanding and appropriate performance of job duties. I think a major cause of the issue at the hospital was that a lot of the higher-ranking staff, chiefs really in particular, they didn't understand what their job duties were in terms of the organizational side. They were great, according to Levy, medical-wise. In more specific sense, his chief operating officer, Levy actually gave her a really good review to begin with, but then noticed rather quickly that she believed her role was to be in control and direct her staff rather than to be supportive. That didn't really mesh with his management style. Straight-level bureaucrats needed to know their voices were valued. And then finally, the management as a whole in general just weren't being held accountable prior to his arrival. Goal setting. Past attempts to change the direction of the hospital. There were a lack of clear objectives. Higher-ranking staff, such as chiefs again, did not possess the skills needed to be able to reach organizational or departmental goals. And then finally, Levy was actually tasked, as most or all public managers or nonprofit managers are, to fulfill internal goals as well as external goals from stakeholders. In this case, the care group, who I think probably were still seriously considering selling the hospital even after Levy was hired, before he was even given a chance to improve the hospital. Then we have decision making. According to Levy, he felt that his staff lacked certain skills that were needed to make proper decisions. They weren't trained to properly analyze organizational problems, and then they weren't trained to notice when they actually reached the solution. This brought me back to part of the course where we talked about trained incompetency or trained incompetence. Skills that staff may have had previously that worked for them were actually a deterrent now, and caused them to have failure. They weren't up to date in training and things like that. Another issue was that chiefs thought they were decision makers individually and as a whole, as a group. Levy actually thought that they were too high ranking and not well suited to be the ones making day-to-day decisions. Those really should be left up to street level bureaucrats. And then there was a history of a lack of decision making in general. So those were the issues that I saw that kind of stuck out to me. What was done? Levy used multiple management techniques to change the culture at the hospital. He thought his ideas through. Each of them had a purpose. His decisions, he felt, not only would improve the hospital, but also gave accountability to each staff person. So here I'll discuss some of the steps I think he took to rectify the issues that previously were detailed. Again, size and structure of the boards and committees. As I stated before, prior to him actually being hired, he recommended that the board of directors be shrunk if he was the one that they chose to hire. He put this out in the forefront so that they knew going in what his plan was. Being up front, I think helped. He explained to them why he wanted the number cut, and eventually it was cut rather quickly, actually, from 44 to 18. That number was more manageable, and the amount of things that the board was able to accomplish largely increased. And then going back to the specific 2 board members who overstepped in the duties, rather than let it linger, he addressed it right away with a memo or an email to them, basically stating, these are the responsibilities of board members, not what you are asking of this particular consultant. Understanding and appropriate performance of job duties. So Levy communicated to the chiefs that their roles were not to be decision makers. Again, they were too high to appropriately make those decisions, but they would be consulted before any policies were actually changed. So they weren't being left out completely. There was just an appropriate time for them to be brought in, and during these steering committees just wasn't it. More specifically with the COO, he met with her, gave her the chance basically to change. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and their management styles didn't mesh. She was more of a controlling, directive type rather than supportive. She ultimately was let go from her position at the hospital. And then I think probably most importantly in this section, Levy listened to everybody on staff, all levels, made sure that doctors, nurses were on his steering committees, made sure they knew that he felt they were the appropriate ones to make decisions. They were on the ground doing the day-to-day work, or as we have learned during the course this spring, they're the street-level bureaucrats. They know what's going on inside the organization. Goal setting. Clear, defined goals in his recovery plan, without a doubt, both internal and external. He knew that small wins mattered in the public eye. He knew what he knew what goals he needed to achieve, and he had those clearly drawn out in his plan. He actually, at one point during the case study, towards the end, describes how, with his goals, he promises low and delivers high. Now, this might be because of the urgent situation of the hospital. If he had promised too high and didn't deliver, they might have scrapped the project right away and just decided to sell. So this is a strategy that we came across in the course, when we read the Steele and Albright article, Games Managers Play at Budget Time, this wasn't necessarily a budget time for Levy, but I think he at times played the role of the sandbagger, right? So he's promising low, delivering high. Most of the time, people who do that, it's to make themselves look good. I think Levy was almost forced to do that in this situation because of the urgency that the hospital was under. So he constantly reminded his staff at all levels the main goal of the hospital was to have a superior level of patient care. He actually says that he would be willing to draw a small deficit to maintain a high level of care. And we know from the course that, for the most part, the main goals of nonprofit and public organizations are to serve the public in some sort rather than to draw in a large profit. Levy made sure to hold all his staff accountable. He formed the improvement plan. It was his idea, but he made it known that it was up to everybody at all levels to make sure that the plan succeeded. He made them he made it clear that everybody was valuable in his plan. Decision making. So he trained his staff to be able to make appropriate decisions. He offered them advice, gave them examples. He gave power to the correct people who could get things done. In his plan, the people who could get things done were, again, those street-level bureaucrats, doctors, nurses, rather than chiefs. They knew what was going on in the individual departments. He explained to the chiefs why it was more appropriate for their staff to be on certain committees rather than themselves. They might not have always been in agreement with him, but at least he explained it to them. He made it clear what decision-making what the process would be. So he would consult, take advice. There would be a process. If there was no decision to be made, then he would be the one to decide. Some useful lessons and insights I think we could take from the case study and Levy as a manager is to give some power to your staff. Give your staff power. Make them feel like they have a voice. Hold all staff accountable. Remind them what the goals are frequently. Let staff speak their mind. Provide reasoning and feedback. And be able to balance internal goals versus external goals. So giving your staff power. I feel like if you want them to take ownership of their choices, you need to let them have some power and either succeed or fail. And if they happen to fail, offer them solutions. Kind of hand in hand with that is to hold them accountable. So street-level bureaucrats, doctors, nurses need to be held to the same standard as chiefs and VPs, especially if they're giving a certain amount of power. Remind all staff what the goals are. Levy drew from their core values to remind them what exactly they were there for, and that was to provide a high level of care. Let staff speak their mind. Give them a voice. I think for nurses, maybe in particular, prior to his arrival, this wasn't really an option for them. They might have been afraid to speak their mind, but he gave them that power. Provide reasoning and feedback. Again, not everybody always agreed with his decisions, but he had a reason for them. He offered feedback. He actually says in the case study that at the beginning, I think towards the beginning of the case study, he talks about how he responded to about 300 emails in 2 to 3 days. That's a significant number, but that's just letting his staff know that they're being heard and he's taking into consideration their opinions and concerns and questions. And then be able to balance internal and external goals. So, we discussed this in the course. Really, how do you balance those? I think Levy did a great job with that. He, in a specific sense, when the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center overtook the Glover Hospital, that wasn't a huge win financially, but in the public eye it was. So he was able to balance those really well, I thought. And then in conclusion, I think he succeeded mainly because he produced results. He's able to show positive cash flow, even profit at times. But more importantly, he set a tone. Staff knew that there was somebody there in charge. He believed in his style. He basically bet on himself. The board had asked him what his contingency plan was, and he let them know right away there wasn't one. This was the last shot for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He also was smart enough not to sacrifice the level of care to reach maybe some other certain financial goals. How did he reach those goals? He had a clear vision in mind of what he thought would succeed. He understood what worked. He had prior experience, of course. Small victories mattered again. And he gave his staff a voice and treated them with respect. I think most importantly, Levy understood that street-level bureaucrats were key to change in having his plan be successful at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.